looking to people who don't have our best interests in mind to lead us. And so I am excited to run this campaign, not just to get me elected as an individual, although of course the goal of any campaign is to win, but to actually build a powerful movement of people that see, yeah, like, actually the way things are happening is messed up. And I'm not just gonna vote in November 2026. I wanna be part of the movement to change society. And that's what this campaign is all about. And it's an invitation. We're a year away, but we're having our first volunteer meetings right now, because it's not just about November 2026. It's about how are we gonna build a movement that can actually use society's resources to benefit its people. And that's gonna take a mass movement of as many people as possible. And we know that these ideas are popular, but a lot of us have been tricked to think that it's not possible to actually meet our needs, because that's kind of what both the Democrats and Republicans tell us. Like, be happy with the crumbs that you get instead of imagining what would be possible if the richest country in the world actually used its resources to benefit people.
How do you plan on doing that? How do you plan on reuniting people as a collective to come together? Especially when a lot of people feel like hopeless, they feel miserable, or feel like the things going on in society is not changeable.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few different components to it. One is that when people believe that change is possible, they get involved to make that change. You know, for example, Black people in this country for a long time didn't have the right to vote. And there was a long struggle to get that right to vote that really ended with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And if you look at the voting rates of Black people after 1965, they're very high. Like, Black people voted a lot. Not just because they were excited to have the right to vote, but because we were told that's how we can change society. And now that we have the right to vote, we can change society to benefit Black people. And the voting participation of Black people in this country has been decreasing since 1965. And a lot of people will give you racist explanations for why that is, like Black people don't care, Black people are ignorant, whatever else. That's not what it is. It's that we've been voting for 60 years, and whether it's Democrats or Republicans in office, people's lives have kept getting worse. Like, people's lives in this country have gotten worse since 1965. And you've had Democrat and Republican presidents, congresspeople, governors, mayors at all levels of government, and people's lives aren't getting better. And again, if you listen to Democrat or Republican politicians, some of them will tell you the things that you want aren't possible. Like, they'll say, yeah, Medicare for all, healthcare for everybody, that sounds great, but it's not really possible. Meanwhile, we spend more money in taxes on healthcare in the United States than any other rich country in the world, but we have the worst health outcomes because those tax dollars are going to private health insurance companies and to pharmaceutical companies instead of just going to fund quality healthcare. You know, so it's completely irrational. But we get boxed into this really narrow window by the Democrats and Republicans to make us believe that anything that's too far out of the reality right now is impossible. So one of the big goals of this campaign is to explain concretely, no, actually, if we just ran society differently and used our wealth to meet people's needs, then we could have a much better society. I'll give you one more example. The US every year spends almost $1 trillion on the military. So that's the most of any other country in the world. We spend about $1 trillion. If you add up the countries 2 through 10, the next 9 countries, and how much they spend on the military, it's still less than what the US spends on the military, combined, those 9 countries. And so if we cut the US military budget by, let's say, 90% and only spent $100 billion, which is still a lot of money, rather than $1 trillion, imagine what you could fund. Right now, SNAP is in the conversation right now because the federal government shut down. People might lose their SNAP benefits. SNAP costs $100 billion every year to put food on the table of 40 million people in this country. So we're spending $1 trillion on war and death and destruction, on genocide in Palestine, and we're spending $100 billion on SNAP. What if we changed the ratio and invested in life instead of investing in war and death and destruction? Right. So that's one of the things, like, actually, this is possible. And then if people believe that this is possible, but the system is in the way and the politicians are in the way of actually implementing that, then they're invited to be part of this movement. And this movement is uniting people of all different backgrounds, all different races, genders, ages, no matter if you live in a city or in a rural area, because if you're a human being, there are certain things that you need to survive: food, housing, healthcare. You deserve a right to education. And so that's a message that can unite people of all different backgrounds, regardless of, anything else.
All right. If you became elected U.S. Senate, what would you do? What would be like the first few things that you would change or do?
So one of the first things I would do is advocate for policies that do invest in life and invest in meeting people's needs instead of in death and destruction, instead of in terrorizing immigrant communities, instead of giving tax cuts to the billionaires, which is all those things are what the politicians today are doing. But also, I believe that society isn't going to be changed just by one person being elected to office. So if I'm elected to the Senate, that's my commitment, that I'm part of a movement to fight for those things. But also, I'm not going to lie to people about what's possible. I'm not going to say, if you elect me, all these things are going to change. I'm going to fight for those things, but every major thing that has been positive in U.S. history has been won through a collective movement. So one of the things that I've been inspired by a lot recently, and I've been talking with a lot of people about, is the abolitionist movement to end slavery in the United States. And in Massachusetts, in the 1850s and 1860s, we had a senator called Charles Sumner, who was an abolitionist, and he was a very fervent fighter against slavery before the Civil War, during and after. And he made a big contribution within the Senate to fight for the abolition of slavery. But slavery didn't end just because there was one guy, Charles Sumner, in office, right? There was a whole abolitionist movement that was very powerful, that was made up of Black people, of formerly enslaved people, and of white people in this country that knew that slavery was an injustice and it should be ended. And then there were people who were fighting a movement to reconstruct society on a more equitable basis. So that's how I look at it. Like, as a socialist who's running for office and who will potentially be elected to office, I'm someone who's going to be fighting every single day for the interests of people like us and everyday people all across the country. And I'm connected to a party, the PSL, and a whole movement that is independent of the Democrats and Republicans, independent of the billionaires, and ultimately that the combination of all these different elements in the movement, including candidates, but not limited to candidates for office, is going to be what's possible, or what's going to allow us to deliver change in this country.
Okay, can you talk about your party a little bit more, or about your background a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I can start with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. We were started in 2004, so we've been around for a little bit over 20 years. And basically, we believe that we need parties that are different from what we see in the Democrat and Republican parties. And there's a few ways that we see that. One is, as a party, we don't just want people to vote for us on one day of the year and then go back to their normal lives. So for me as a PSL member, I am involved on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, in organizing in my community to fight for a better world. And we believe that people are protagonists of change, that you don't just have to sit around until November every year and then check off a bubble in the voting booth and then go home and hope that the people that you elected do good. Okay. So we're a party that is of organizers, of revolutionaries that want to change society. And then again, the point is that if we want to change a problem, we have to identify the source of it. And we believe that the source of the problem in our societies is the capitalist system, a system that allows a tiny group of billionaires to exploit and oppress the majority people and to hoard the resources to themselves. And so if that's the problem, the billionaires, then if we have a political party that is funded by and accountable to the billionaires, we're never going to solve the problem. And that's a description of both the Democrat and Republican parties. So we're about building something that's independent of the billionaires, independent of the people who create the problem in our society, and invites, again, everyday working people to get involved, because every successful movement in our country's history has involved everyday people taking matters into their own hands and saying, we don't have to wait for somebody to save us. We can collectively create the solution to our problems. So that's a little bit about the PSO.
What makes you nervous when you're running for Senate, as you're running right now?
One of the things that makes me nervous is I've seen the ways in which politicians in this country always make false promises. And I have a certain association with the political system in this country based on my experience growing up here. And so, as a community organizer, as someone who considers myself a revolutionary, I want to make sure that we're clear in this campaign about what our values are, and that this isn't just another example of one of these politicians who, swoops into your neighborhood, asks you for your vote, and then you never see them again. So I want to make sure that we're building something that's, authentic, that represents people, that is a movement that people can plug into. And sometimes I would talk to people sometimes about the campaign, and they're like, "Oh, I never met an aspiring politician," and I kind of gotta have a recoil at that, because I've always considered myself an activist, an organizer, but also I understand that there's a very important role to play in intervening in elections and to providing an alternative to the false solutions that were promised by the Democratic and Republican Party. So I'm trying to embrace that challenge, and I'm excited because I think we can really build a dynamic campaign. But that's something that's definitely been different for me and has made me a little bit nervous.
All right. You seem like a youthful guy. So what vision do you have for the youth, or for the kids that want a society that's better than what it is right now? Because a lot of kids are facing different challenges, whether it's their community, the economic stance in the city, the state right now, or just people that are fearful of their immigration status or sexual orientation or either class or race or anything like that. What would you say your vision of society is for them, and what do you plan on doing to help these kids that suffer or that may be anxious of what's to come?
That's a great question, and I'm glad that you asked that, because my background also is in youth programming. I used to teach in a GED program, so working with people high school age around education, and then I ran a high school after school and summer program. And I've always loved working with young people because there's so much potential and creativity and enthusiasm that young people have. And also I've seen the ways in which our society has really hurt young people. The program that I was running for high schoolers in Dorchester, it was after the COVID pandemic started, and I saw the ways in which our young people are really struggling because they're seeing what's happening in the world around them, and all of the violence, all of the exploitation that's happening. They've been seeing the genocide in Palestine playing out. You can watch it on your phone, and that's not good for anybody's well-being, let alone young people. And some of the young people I've talked with and have relationships with also express no real optimism or hope for the future. And I don't blame them, because I am relatively young. I'm 30 years old, and basically my whole life since 1995, this country's been at war for almost every single year of my life. We've had a major economic crisis in 2008 that devastated so many families. You had the COVID pandemic. You've had 2 terms of Donald Trump. There's a lot to feel upset about and scared about in terms of this country's future. And I think that young people deserve transparency and truth-telling around that. We shouldn't sugarcoat that. High schoolers or people even younger can see what's happening in front of them. They're not dumb, they're not naive, they can see what's happening. So we can be honest about that. And at the same time, I think one of the things that distinguishes this campaign and the socialist movement from other political movements is that we actually do have a vision for what could change in our society. And I think one of the things I'm most excited to think about in terms of utilizing society's resources to benefit people is investing in human beings ourselves, investing in art and culture and youth sports. And I know, for example, a lot of young people in our societies are concerned about, or in our communities are concerned about, violence. And I think the best antidotes to violence are, one, creating tight-knit communities, and two, investing in people's needs, both economic needs and kind of cultural or social needs. And so instead of, again, investing in war and militarism and spending so much money on ICE, like the Congress, where I'm running to be a senator, in the summer they passed the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which gave $200 billion of funding to ICE. And you see what ICE is doing here in Massachusetts and all across the country. They're terrorizing people in our communities, including students. They're detaining students, they're hanging outside of schools. That's not making anybody safe. That's making people feel unsafe. And actually we've had students here in Massachusetts being detained. One was sent to West Virginia and to be held in ICE detention center. Like, what is that? That's really robbing people of their humanity. And so what if we use that $200 billion that is being used to terrorize immigrant communities and invested in, again, like youth programs, sports, culture? And the last thing I'll say on it is also jobs. I think that's part of the reason that a lot of young people feel pessimistic about the future, is that you look and there's already not a lot of good jobs out there. And then you see the prospect of artificial intelligence coming and taking away even more jobs. And back in this country's history, in the 1930s and 40s, there was programs called the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Public Works Administration that used tax dollars to create jobs. 10 million jobs were created in this country through those programs that were funded by the federal government. And those programs are used to build things like bridges, highways, roads. We're on Blue Hill Ave right now. You look out there, like the road is in shambles.
Yeah.
And so what if we use money to create high-paying union jobs for people to repair our streets, to keep our neighborhoods clean, and to actually create meaningful jobs? Like, that's the stuff that's possible if our government used the resources to fund people's needs instead of to make the rich richer. And that's what I'm fighting for.
Word. So how would you alleviate a little bit of tension to the kids that do feel fearful or that do have anxiety, like going to school and fearing for their safety because of their immigration status?
Yeah, 100%. For one, I think we have to be real. Like, there's a reason to feel scared, and that's because the political system in this country is demonizing immigrants and is funneling resources into ICE to terrorize people in our communities, to stop people on the street, to stop people coming out of school, to stop people coming out of church, just trying to live their everyday lives. And for the most part, the vast majority of immigrants in this country, just like the vast majority of people, are just trying to get by, to survive and to provide for their families. So I completely understand the fear, and I think the safety and protection in part comes from us building a movement to protect each other, and then also I think changing the political narrative. Like right now, the Democratic Party, they are putting out a message that they think that they've been too pro-immigration. That's what they're saying internally, and that's what they're saying in the strategy discussions. They think that they're losing ground to the Republicans because they've been too pro-immigration. Mm-hmm. So actually, as our communities are getting terrorized, the Democrats are retreating instead of defending our communities. And we've seen that here in Massachusetts with Governor Maura Healey, for example, who said Massachusetts is not a sanctuary state. Like, they're signaling that they're willing to sacrifice our immigrant communities
for little folks,
for their votes. Yeah.